glad you could join us. Two things. First of all, remember in chapter 9, there was a man that was born blind, and Jesus had healed him, and there was a whole lot of hoopla about that. And then we went on into chapter 10, and it's the same audience. Just by way of reminder, he's speaking to unbelieving Pharisees who refuse to accept the fact that he's the Messiah. And so he's still talking to them, and he starts talking about his sheep. And he's saying the reason that you don't understand what I'm saying to you is because you're not following me. You don't want to follow me. My sheep hear my voice and follow me, and I give them eternal life, and no one can pluck them out of my Father's hand. Or, excuse me, out of my hand. Then he says, my Father is greater than all, and no one is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. And okay, and they're cruising along going, well, okay, you're saying we don't understand. But then he said, verse 30 of John 10, I and my Father are one. Now, they understood what he meant by that. Some people will try to excuse that and say, well, you're just saying my Father and I are of the same purpose. They were going to stone him because he was saying, we're both God. Okay, I and my Father are one. And so that's where we pick up here in chapter 10. Okay, 31. The Jews picked up stones again to stone him. And by the way, he was going to die by crucifixion. It just wasn't going to happen. The Father was going to see to it that he was going to die on the right day, the right way. Okay. Jesus answered them, I showed you many good works from the Father. Remember, 3 years worth. And these guys saw most of them because they followed him around trying to find out what was wrong with him, and couldn't find it. For which of these works are you stoning me? And the Jews answered, for a good work we don't stone you, but for blasphemy. Because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Have you thought about what really happened? He, being God, made himself a man. Not he, being a man, made himself out to be God, but he, being God, made himself a man. It hadn't been that long since Christmas. And you remember the wise men came and they were saying, we're looking for the King of the Jews. And then he calls the Pharisees in and he says, this supposed future King of the Jews, this Messiah, you understand Herod was not a Jew. He was a descendant of Esau. Where is he supposed to be born? In other words, so that I can kill all the babies in that area. And they said, Bethlehem. Because it says in Micah 5:2, you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, are not least of the clans of Judah, for out of you will come one who will rule my people. And they stopped right there. But that's not the rest of the verse. The rest of the verse says, his goings forth have been from of old, even from everlasting. In other words, this king who will be born in Bethlehem is eternal. Remember, no, don't do it to us, please, preacher. John 1:1. Don't go all the way back to the beginning, but remember, he's the fullest revelation of what God is like because he's God in the flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14 of chapter 1, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So they were stoning him, thinking, because they didn't want to believe, thinking that he was just a man who made himself out to be God. But actually the reverse was true. He was God who made himself a man. Have a great day.